The billionaire CEO was drunk, desperate, and locked out of his own doomsday vault with $1 billion trapped inside. In a fit of cruel rage, he dragged his housekeeper's slow 11-year-old daughter to the massive steel door and gave her a terrifying ultimatum. Crack this uncrackable code in 60 seconds and the money is yours. Fail and your mother goes to jail. He thought it was a dark joke. He thought she was just a terrified child staring blankly at the floor. But he made a fatal miscalculation. He didn't realize that 3 months ago, while polishing his silver, she had watched him enter the combination in the reflection of his soup spoon, and she hadn't forgotten a single digit. If you're ready to see how a quiet genius takes down an arrogant tyrant, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Now let's get into the story.
The air in the penthouse of the Millennium Tower was always set to exactly 68 degrees. It was a temperature that Aleister Crowley claimed kept the mind sharp. But to everyone else, it just felt like the inside of a refrigerator. Aleister stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass wall, looking down at Manhattan from the 95th floor. He was a man composed of sharp angles, a bespoke suit that cost more than a Honda Civic, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes that were perpetually scanning for a threat. "Sir, it was a glitch," the man standing behind the desk pleaded. This was Marcus Vance, the chief of security. He was a former Navy SEAL, a man who had survived combat zones, but he was currently sweating through his shirt in the air-conditioned office. "A glitch," Aleister repeated. He didn't turn around. He watched the traffic crawling like bacteria on the streets below. The thermal sensor in the East Corridor blinked red for 3 seconds at 2:14 a.m. You logged it as a system error. Because it was Mr. Crow. A spider crawled over the lens. We verified it on the backup cam. Aleister turned slowly. A spider. He walked to his desk, a slab of black obsidian that looked less like furniture and more like an altar to capitalism. He picked up a fountain pen. "Do you know what I keep in this office, Vance?" Aleister asked, his voice terrifyingly calm. He gestured to the far wall. There, dominating the room, was the vault. It wasn't a standard wall safe. It was a custom-fabricated beast of brushed steel and brass, 7 feet tall, inspired by the bank vaults of the 19th century, but updated with military-grade alloys. It didn't have a keypad. It didn't have a biometric scanner. Aleister didn't trust electronics. Electronics could be hacked. Electronics had backdoors. The vault had a single massive mechanical wheel, a spinning dial with 4 concentric rings that had to be aligned with surgical precision. It was a physical puzzle, a masterpiece of engineering that only Aleister knew the combination to. "Inside that vault," Aleister said softly, "is $1 billion in bearer bonds and cold storage cryptocurrency drives. It is the liquidity for the merger that will make me the most powerful man in New York by tomorrow morning. And you let a spider compromise the perimeter." "Sir, nothing was compromised." "You're fired," Aleister said. He scribbled a signature on a check that was already waiting on the desk. "This is 6 months severance. If you speak to anyone about the layout of this apartment, I will bury you in litigation so deep you'll need a snorkel to breathe. Get out." Vance stared at him, his jaw working. He wanted to argue. He wanted to scream that Aleister was insane, that the paranoia was eating him alive. But he looked at the check. He looked at Aleister's dead, shark-like eyes. Vance took the check. "You're going to end up alone in this fortress, Crow. And it's going to be cold." He walked out. Aleister didn't watch him go. He waited until the heavy oak doors clicked shut. Then he walked to the vault. He ran his hand over the cold steel. "Better alone," Aleister whispered to the machine. "Alone is safe." 50 feet away, in the service kitchen, the air was warmer, smelling of lemon polish and rising dough. Zuri Washington sat under the massive butcher block island. She was 11 years old, skinny, with knees that knocked together and thick, black-framed glasses that magnified her eyes, making her look like a startled owl. To the casual observer, Zuri was just a child playing on the floor. To Zuri, the floor was a landscape of data. She was staring at a spill of dry rice that had escaped a bag. Most people would see a mess. Zuri saw a constellation. 342 grains, her mind whispered. 74 are broken. 12 have black specks. The pattern looks like the chaotic distribution of the Milky Way, Sector 7. She didn't mean to count them. She couldn't help it. It was the hyperthymesia. Her brain didn't have a delete button. She remembered the license plate of the taxi that splashed her 3 years ago, T78-99L. She remembered the exact shade of blue of her kindergarten teacher's scarf, cerulean. She remembered the sound of her father's voice before he left, a B-flat baritone that vibrated in her chest. It was loud in her head, always loud, so she stayed quiet on the outside to balance it out. "Zuri, baby, please." Her mother, Sarah, was on her hands and knees, scrubbing a scuff mark on the baseboard. Sarah looked exhausted. Her uniform was crisp, but her eyes were shadowed with the kind of fatigue that sleep couldn't fix. "You have to stay under there," Sarah whispered, scrubbing harder. "Mr. Crow is in a mood today. He fired Mr. Vance. If he sees you, if he thinks you're in the way." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. They both knew the rule. Staff are invisible. Staff families are non-existent. Sarah reached out and touched Zuri's knee. "Just be a shadow, okay? Shadows don't get hurt. Shadows don't get fired." Zuri looked at her mother. She saw the 3 new gray hairs near her temple. She saw the tremor in her mother's left hand. A stressed tremor that started 2 months ago when the rent went up. "I'm a shadow," Zuri whispered back. She went back to the rice. She began to line the grains up by size, creating a perfect gradient from smallest to largest. It was soothing. Order from chaos. The kitchen door swung open. Sarah scrambled to her feet, placing herself between the island and the door, shielding Zuri with her body. Alistair Crow walked in. He wasn't wearing his jacket anymore. His tie was loosened, but he didn't look relaxed. He looked manic. He was holding a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. Scotch, aged 25 years, costing more per sip than Sarah made in a week. He didn't look at Sarah. He walked straight to the refrigerator, yanked it open, and stared inside as if the answer to his problems was written on the milk carton. "Where is the ice?" Alistair snapped. "The sphere ice. For the whiskey." I'm freezing a new batch, sir," Sarah stammered, wiping her wet hands on her apron. "You used the last ones last night." Alistair slammed the fridge door. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Under the table, Zuri flinched, her hand knocking the line of rice out of alignment. "Useless," Alistair muttered. "I am surrounded by incompetence. I pay for spheres, Sarah. Not cubes. Spheres melt slower. Dilution control. Is that too much physics for you to grasp?" "No, sir." "I'm sorry, sir." Alistair took a sip of the warm scotch and grimaced. He leaned against the counter, rubbing his temples. He looked like a man whose internal wiring was starting to fray. The firing of Vance hadn't calmed him. It had only made him feel more exposed. He looked down. He saw a small, brown hand reaching out from under the island, trying to pull a stray grain of rice back into the shadows. Alistair frowned. He took a step back and looked under the table. Zuri froze. She looked up. She saw him upside down. She saw the expensive Italian leather of his shoes. She saw the way his nostrils flared. She saw the red vein in his left eye. She recorded it all. Time, 11:14 a.m. Subject, Alistair Crow. Pulse, visible in neck rapid. "What is this?" Alistair asked, his voice dangerously quiet. That's my daughter, sir," Sarah interjected quickly, stepping forward, her voice trembling. "Zuri, school is closed for maintenance today. I didn't have a sitter. She's been quiet. She hasn't touched anything." Alistair stared at the girl. He didn't see a child. He saw clutter. He saw a variable he hadn't accounted for. "She's staring at me," Alistair said. "Why is she staring at me?" She's a little slow, sir," Sarah lied. It was the lie she always used. It was safer for people to think Zuri was simple than to know she was seeing everything. She doesn't mean anything by it. Zuri looked down. Zuri lowered her eyes to the rice. Alistair sneered. Great. I live in a penthouse, and I have a half-wit living under my table. He finished his scotch in one gulp and slammed the glass down on the counter directly above Zuri's head. Keep her out of my sight, Alistair commanded, turning to leave. I have to resequence the vault combination since Vance is gone. If I see her wandering the halls, Sarah, you can join Vance in the unemployment line. Do you understand? Yes, Mr. Crow. Alistair stormed out. Sarah let out a breath that sounded like a sob. She slid down to the floor, crawling under the table to pull Zuri into a hug. I'm sorry, baby, Sarah whispered into Zuri's hair. I'm so sorry he called you that. Zuri didn't cry. She rested her head on her mother's shoulder. She was replaying the scene in her head. Not the insult, that didn't matter. She was replaying what he said. Resequence the vault combination. And she was replaying the image of his watch. It was a Patek Philippe. The second hand had been ticking perfectly in time with her heartbeat. He's scared, Mama, Zuri whispered. Sarah pulled back, looking at her daughter. What? The man, Zuri said, pushing her glasses up. He smells like fear. Like wet pennies. Sarah brushed Zuri's cheek. It doesn't matter what he smells like. Just stay hidden. Tomorrow you go back to school, and we forget this place exists. But Zuri knew she wouldn't forget. She never forgot anything. Have you ever had to make yourself small to survive a difficult situation? Or have you ever been underestimated because you were quiet? Let me know in the comments below. 11:47 p.m. The penthouse was a tomb of shadows. The city lights of New York bled through the glass walls, casting long, distorted shapes across the marble floor. Alistair Crow stood before the vault. He was stripped down to his undershirt. His hair, usually slicked back with military precision, hung in wet strands over his forehead. He smelled of stale scotch and panic. Left to 80. Right to 20. Left 2. He stopped. His hand, slick with sweat, slipped on the polished brass dial. 50, he whispered to the empty room. Was it 50? Or 15? He tried to focus. His brain felt like it was filled with cotton wool. He had resequenced the lock yesterday afternoon, right after firing Vance. He had been angry then, drinking then too. He had chosen a sequence that was mathematically perfect, something uncrackable. But now, 12 hours and a bottle of whiskey later, the perfect sequence was gone. It was a ghost in the machine. He spun the dial again. Left. Right. Left. He grabbed the heavy steel handle and pulled. Nothing. The vault didn't budge. It was a solid block of rejection. Open, Alistair commanded, his voice cracking. Open, you damn thing. He slammed his fist against the steel door. The pain was sharp, grounding, but ineffective. The vault didn't care about his pain. It didn't care that at 8 a.m., a team of auditors was arriving to finalize the merger. It didn't care that without the physical bearer bonds sitting on the middle shelf, Alistair Crow was technically insolvent. He was worth $1 billion on paper, but he couldn't buy a cup of coffee without what was in that box. Think, he hissed, pressing his forehead against the cold metal. Think, Alistair. You are the smartest man in the room. You always are. But he wasn't. Tonight, he was just a drunk man locked out of his own house. Panic began to curdle into rage. It started low in his gut and rose like bile. It wasn't fair. He built this. He owned this. Why was it defying him? He spun around, looking for something to break. He saw the crystal decanter on his desk, the one Sarah had refilled with his precious sphere ice. He grabbed it. He didn't pour a drink. He hurled it across the room. Smash! The heavy crystal exploded against the far wall, sending shards of glass and amber liquid raining down onto the Persian rug. Damn it! Alistair screamed, the sound tearing his throat. The library door creaked open. Alistair spun around, his chest heaving, looking for a target. Sarah stood in the doorway, a polishing cloth in her hand. She looked terrified. Behind her, peeking out from the folds of her mother's skirt, was Zuri. They were supposed to be gone. They were supposed to be invisible. Mr. Crow? Sarah whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the shattered glass, the half-naked billionaire, the smell of ruin. I heard a noise. We were just finishing the library floors. I thought you were asleep. Alistair stared at them. His eyes were red-rimmed wild. He didn't see a concerned employee. He saw a witness. He saw someone watching him in his moment of absolute weakness. And then his eyes locked on Zuri. The girl wasn't looking at the broken glass. She wasn't looking at his face. She was looking past him. She was staring intently at the vault dial. Her eyes were magnified by her thick glasses, unblinking, processing. Counting. She was analyzing his failure. The thought snapped something in Alistair's brain. The humiliation was too much. He needed to transfer the pain. He needed to make someone else feel as small and helpless as he felt right now. You, Alistair growled. He marched across the room. He moved with the swaying, unpredictable momentum of a drunk. Sarah stepped back, trying to push Zuri behind her. Sir, we're leaving. We're going right now. No, Alistair snapped. He reached out and grabbed Zuri's arm. His grip was hard, bruising. He yanked her out from behind her mother. No, please, Sarah cried, grabbing at his sleeve. Alistair shoved Sarah away with a violent backhand. She stumbled, falling onto the leather sofa. He dragged Zuri across the room. The girl didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just stumbled along, her oversized glasses slipping down her nose, her eyes locked on his wristwatch. Tick, tick, tick. Alistair hauled her up to the vault. He spun her around and slammed her back against the cold steel door. You like this? Alistair shouted, his face inches from hers. He gestured to the dial. I saw you staring at it earlier. You think it's pretty? You think it's a toy? Zuri shook her head mutely. The smell of whiskey was overwhelming. It smelled like burning. It's not a toy. Alistair laughed, a cruel, jagged sound. It's a coffin. It's where I buried my life. He looked at the dial, then back at the girl. A sick, twisted idea formed in his mind. A way to punish them for seeing him fail. A way to prove that even in his failure, he was still the god of this penthouse. You want it? Alistair sneered. You want what's inside? He grabbed her small hand. He forced it up, pressing her palm against the brass dial. I'll make you a deal, halfwit, Alistair hissed. Since you like staring at it so much. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was far more terrifying than his shouting. Open it. Zuri blinked. Sir, open. The safe, Alistair enunciated, mocking her slow speech. If you can crack this code, if you can open this door, everything inside is yours. $1 billion. You can take it. You can buy a new house for your mother. You can buy a new brain for yourself. Sarah scrambled up from the couch, weeping. Mr. Crow, stop. She's a child. She doesn't understand. Alistair spun on Sarah, pointing a shaking finger. Shut up, or you're fired. Not just fired, blacklisted. I will make sure you starve in the street. He turned back to Zuri. But, Alistair's grin widened, showing too many teeth. If you can't open it, if you waste my time. He leaned down, his eyes dead and cold. Then I call the police. And I tell them you stole the bearer bonds. I tell them you and your mother are thieves. And you go to jail. Forever. It was insane. It was the logic of a madman. But in this room, on the 95th floor, his madness was the law. 1 minute, Alistair said, looking at his Patek Philippe watch. Tick-tock, little shadow. Show me what you've got. Please, Sarah screamed, throwing herself onto her knees. She didn't care about the glass shards digging into her skin. She scrambled across the Persian rug, grabbing the hem of Alistair's trousers. It was a gesture of medieval desperation, a serf begging a king not to burn the village. She doesn't know numbers, sir. Sarah lied, her voice hysterical. She can't read a dial. She's 11. Please, Mr. Crow, look at her. She's terrified. Alistair looked down at the woman clinging to his leg. He didn't feel pity. He felt a surge of dark, electric power. 10 minutes ago, he had felt impotent, defeated by a machine. Now, he held the fate of 2 lives in his hand. The balance of the universe was restoring itself. He was the chaotic god of the penthouse again. He kicked his leg out, shaking Sarah off. Get up, Alistair spat. You're embarrassing yourself. Just let us go, Sarah sobbed, reaching for Zuri again. We won't say anything. We'll disappear. Please. Disappear. Alistair laughed. He leaned against the safe, checking his watch. You don't get to disappear, Sarah. You stole from me. We didn't. You stole my peace of mind. Alistair roared, the sound bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. You and your creeping, staring child. You think I don't see you? Watching me? Judging me? He turned his focus back to Zuri. She was pressed against the safe door, her small frame vibrating against the steel. 45 seconds, Alistair announced casually. Tick-tock. Inside Zuri's head, the world was screaming. It wasn't just Alistair's voice. It was everything. Her brain didn't filter. It absorbed. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, 60 hertz. The sirens on the street below, Doppler effect moving south. The smell of the scotch on his breath, peat, iodine decay. The pattern of the veins in his forehead, Y-shape pulsing. It was too much. It was a tsunami of data crashing over her. Usually, when the world got this loud, Zuri would shut down. She would go to her quiet room, a mental construct where she stored white noise. She would become the shadow her mother taught her to be. Shadows don't speak. Shadows don't fight. Shadows survive by not existing. She squeezed her eyes shut. She tried to go to the quiet room. Open it, Alistair screamed, slamming his hand against the metal next to her head. Clang. The sound rang in her ears like a physical slap. Zuri opened her eyes. She looked at her mother. Sarah was on the floor, her uniform torn at the knee, blood spotting the white fabric. Her face was a mask of absolute terror. She looked broken. The woman who had held up Zuri's world, who had worked double shifts on bad knees, who had taught her to organize spices to calm her mind. She was being destroyed. If Zuri stayed a shadow, the shadow would swallow her mother, too. He is going to call the police, Zuri analyzed. He is going to lie. We have no money for lawyers. We go to foster care. Mama goes to jail. The data rearranged itself. The fear remained, but the priority shifted. Survival is not hiding, her mind whispered. Survival is solving the puzzle. 30 seconds. Alistair shouted, enjoying the show. I'm dialing 911 in 30 seconds. Zuri took a breath. It smelled of floor wax and fear. She peeled herself off the safe door. She didn't look at Alistair. She looked at the dial. It was brass, polished to a mirror finish. It had numbers etched in black enamel. 0 to 99. Sarah stopped screaming. She saw Zuri move. She saw the shift in her daughter's posture. It wasn't the slump of a slow child. It was the rigid focus of a surgeon stepping up to the table. Zuri, Sarah whispered. Zuri didn't answer. She couldn't. Words were too slow. She stepped toward the machine. She was too short. The dial was at eye level for a grown man. For her, it was high above her head. She looked around. There was a library stool a few feet away, heavy oak, upholstered in leather. Zuri walked over to it. What are you doing? Alistair scoffed. Building a fort? 20 seconds. Zuri grabbed the stool. It was heavy. She gritted her teeth, her skinny arms straining, and dragged it across the marble floor. Scrapey. The sound cut through the tension. She positioned the stool in front of the safe. She stepped up. 1 step. 2 steps. Now she was face to face with the brass wheel. She could see her own reflection in the metal. She looked small, scared, but she wasn't looking at herself. She was looking at the smudges. She was looking at the microscopic scratches on the brass. 10 seconds. Alistair yelled, pulling his phone out of his pocket. Say goodbye to your mother, Zuri. Zuri reached out. Her hand was trembling, but her mind was cold. Static. Clear. She didn't need to guess. She didn't need to be lucky. She just needed to remember. She looked at the brass, and the memory flooded in. Zuri stood on the library stool. It added 18 inches to her height, bringing her face to face with the mechanical heart of the vault. But even with the added height, she felt microscopic. Alistair Crow stepped up behind her. He was so close that the fabric of his suit brushed against her bare arm. He radiated heat, a furnace of alcohol and aggression. He placed a hand on the back of the stool, leaning in, trapping her between his body and the steel wall. Tick-tock, retard, Alistair whispered, his breath hot on her neck. The garbage truck is coming for you. Beep, beep, beep. He poked her shoulder with a hard finger, punctuating each beep. That's where you're going, he taunted. You and your mother. Trash goes to the trash. Zuri trembled. The insult stung, but the physical proximity was worse. It was an invasion. His presence was a chaotic static in her peripheral vision, threatening to disrupt the delicate signal she was trying to catch. She gripped the edge of the steel door frame to steady herself. Block him out, her mind commanded. Isolate the variable. She focused on the dial. It was a Sargent and Greenleaf mechanical lock, customized with a brass finish. It was 6 inches in diameter. Under the harsh track lighting of the study, it gleamed like a golden eye. Zuri stared into the polished metal. Because the brass was curved, it acted like a convex mirror. It reflected the entire room behind her in a distorted, fisheye view. She could see the reflection of the Persian rug. She could see the distorted shape of her mother weeping on the floor. She could see the bookshelves lining the far wall. And she could see the reflection of the silver tea service sitting on the side table in the corner. The silver tea service. Her eyes locked onto the reflection of the reflection. The data in her brain began to swirl. The timestamp in her memory rolled back. Current time, 11:52 p.m. Target time, October 14th, 1:15 p.m. The noise of Alastair's taunting began to fade, turned down by the volume knob of her concentration. Are you sleeping? Alastair barked, shaking the stool. Spin it. Spin the wheel, monkey. Zuri didn't blink. She stared at the curve of the brass. She wasn't seeing the room as it was now. She was seeing the room as it was then. The brass dial became a portal. 3 months ago, she had been polishing that silver tea service. She had been invisible then, too. Alastair had been standing right here, in front of the safe. He had been eating soup. And he had been sloppy. Alastair, in the present, leaned closer, his patience snapping. Time's up, he hissed, reaching for his phone to dial the police. Game over. Zuri's hand shot out. She didn't touch the dial tentatively. She grabbed it with a sudden, shocking certainty. The cold metal bit into her palm. She didn't need to guess. She didn't need to solve a puzzle. She just needed to follow the ghost in the machine. The brass dial in front of Zuri dissolved. The harsh track lighting of the night softened into the warm, diffused sunlight of an autumn afternoon. Time shift, October 14th, 1:15 p.m. Zuri was sitting on the floor in the corner of the study. She had a polishing cloth in her hand and a silver tea service spread out on a velvet drop cloth. The smell of ammonia polish was sharp in her nose. She was 11 years old, 3 months younger. She was invisible. Alastair Crow was sitting at his desk. He wasn't drunk then. He was eating lunch, roasted tomato basil soup. He held a heavy silver spoon in his right hand. He was on the phone, and he was angry. I don't care what the subpoena says, Alastair hissed into his headset. Sebastian can rot. He didn't have the guts to pull the trigger on the short sale. I did. The capital is mine. Zuri polished a sugar bowl. Rub, rub, rub. She listened to the hum of the hard drives in the server room. She listened to the anger in Alastair's voice. He says I stole it? Alastair laughed, slurping his soup. Let him prove it. The bonds are physical, Mark. They aren't on a ledger he can subpoena. They are in the box. Alastair stood up. He was agitated. He walked over to the vault. Hold on, Alastair said to his lawyer. I'm resetting the tumbler. I had a dream last night that Sebastian guessed the birthday sequence. I need something random, something chaotic. Zuri stopped polishing. She didn't look at the safe. She knew the rule. Never look at the master when he is hiding his gold. She looked down at the side table. Alastair had set his soup bowl down there while he stood up. The spoon was resting in the bowl, handle up. The back of the spoon, a perfect convex oval of sterling silver, was facing the vault. Alastair reached for the dial. Zuri stared at the spoon. In the curved silver, the room was warped. The straight lines of the bookshelves bent like bananas. Alastair looked like a stretched giant. But the dial was a distinct, high-contrast circle. Alastair's hand moved. Left. Zuri didn't count numbers. Numbers were too small to see in the reflection. She saw geometry. She saw angles. His wrist rotated to the 9 o'clock position. Zuri's mind engaged. It wasn't a thought, it was a recording. Capture. Right. Alistair spun the dial back. His hand stopped when his knuckles aligned with the spine of the leather encyclopedia on the shelf behind him. Position for a clock. Capture. Left. Alistair spun it again. A full rotation. Then he stopped when his elbow created a 45-degree angle with the door frame. Position 12 o'clock. Capture. Done, Alistair said into the phone, oblivious. He grabbed the handle and tugged. The safe locked. It's set. Sebastian will never guess that. It's just noise. Random noise. He picked up the spoon, dipped it into the soup, and put it in his mouth. He swallowed the evidence. He wiped his mouth with a napkin, looked at Zuri, who was furiously polishing the sugar bowl again, and sneered. Missed a spot, he muttered as he walked back to his desk. He thought he was alone. He thought the girl in the corner was just furniture that breathed. He didn't know that he had just performed his secret code in front of a living camera that never ran out of film. Snap. The memory solidified. The smell of tomato soup vanished, replaced by the reek of scotch. Zuri was back on the library stool. The brass dial was cold under her palm. Alistair was breathing down her neck. Time's up, Alistair shouted, grabbing her shoulder. Get down. Zuri didn't move. Her eyes were wide, seeing the silver spoon superimposed over the brass dial. She saw the geometry. She saw the angles. She didn't need the numbers. She just needed to mimic the dance. She gripped the dial. Left to 9 o'clock. She spun the wheel. It felt heavy, smooth, filled with gears and grease. She watched the tick mark on the dial. She didn't look at the numbers. She moved her hand until it matched the position from the spoon. Stop. What are you doing? Alistair froze. His hand hovered over her shoulder. Zuri didn't answer. Right to 4 o'clock. She spun the dial back. She felt the tumblers engaging inside the steel skin. Click, click, click. She stopped exactly where his knuckles had lined up with the book. Stop. Alistair's mouth fell open slightly. He recognized the movement. It wasn't the random flailing of a child. It was precise. It was familiar. Left to 12 o'clock. Zuri spun the dial one full rotation, passing the 0, then stopped dead at the top. Stop. She let go of the dial. The silence in the room was absolute. Sarah had stopped crying. Alistair had stopped breathing. Even the traffic outside seemed to hush. Zuri looked at the steel handle. She reached out with both hands. She wrapped her small fingers around the cold metal lever. She pulled. Zuri closed her eyes. The world fell away. Alistair's heavy breathing, her mother's sobbing, the hum of the city, it all receded. In the darkness behind her eyelids, there was only the spoon. The spoon was the conductor's baton. She didn't treat the dial like a lock. She treated it like an instrument. Her hand moved. Whir! She spun the wheel to the left. It wasn't the jerky, terrified movement of a child. It was fluid, continuous. The brass warmed under her friction. Inside the steel skin of the vault, the first drive cam rotated. Zuri could feel it through her fingertips. She didn't know the mechanics of a Sargent and Greenleaf lock, but she could feel the vibration change as the gate aligned with the fence. Click. The sound was soft, like a dry twig snapping, but in the silence of the penthouse, it was a thunderclap. She stopped instantly. Right. She reversed the spin. Her hand danced. She wasn't counting numbers. She was replaying the rhythm of the spoon's reflection. Short turn. Pause. Long turn. Alistair Crowe stopped breathing. He was standing right behind her, his hand raised as if to strike her or pull her down, but he froze. He recognized the rhythm. It was his rhythm. He watched the girl's hand. She hit the second mark without hesitation. She didn't look at the numbers. She was playing the dial by feel, by memory, by a geometric intuition that he couldn't comprehend. Click. The second tumbler dropped. A strange, cold sensation washed over Alistair. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a terrifying realization. The random noise he had invented to protect his fortune. The chaotic sequence he thought no one could guess was being played back to him by a child he had called a half-wit. He lowered his hand slowly. His mouth hung open, a slack-jawed expression of disbelief that ruined his carefully cultivated mask of power. In the doorway of the study, the audience gathered. Edmund, the night butler, had heard the shouting and come running. 2 members of the night security team, the ones Alistair hadn't fired yet, were right behind him. They stopped at the threshold. They saw the shattered decanter. They saw Sarah on the floor. And they saw the tiny girl in the oversized glasses standing on a library stool, dominating the room. They didn't move to intervene. They were paralyzed by the spectacle. Zuri didn't see them. She was in the zone. She was in the quiet room, but for the first time, the quiet room wasn't empty. It was filled with the music of the machine. Left. The final rotation. The spoon in her memory turned one last time, aligning with the door frame. Zuri turned the brass wheel. It felt heavy, resisting her, testing her. Come on, she thought. Open. She spun past 0. She felt the final tumbler lift. It hung there, suspended by gravity and grease. She nudged it, just a fraction of a millimeter. Thunk. The sound was deep, resonant, and final. The bolt retracted. The handle, which had been locked rigid for 12 hours, suddenly gave a quarter-inch under the weight of her hand. The bond was complete. The machine had accepted her command. Zuri opened her eyes. She was back in the penthouse. She let go of the dial. Her hand hovered in the air, still vibrating from the tactile feedback. She looked at the reflection in the brass one last time. She saw Alistair's face behind her. He looked pale. He looked small. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. No one dared to breathe. No one dared to ask if it had worked. Zuri gripped the heavy steel lever with both hands. Shadows can open doors too, she whispered. She pulled. Clunk. The sound reverberated through the floorboards, deep and heavy, like a stone dropping into a well. Then came the hiss. It was the sound of air rushing into a vacuum. The pneumatic seal of the Waldus vault released its grip. The massive steel door, weighing nearly 2 tons, popped open an inch. Zuri stepped back on the library stool. She pushed the heavy door. It swung outward on silent, perfectly balanced hinges. Light spilled out. The interior of the vault was illuminated by soft, amber LEDs. It looked like a shrine. On the center shelf, stacked in neat, menacing piles, were the bearer bonds, thick sheaves of paper worth millions each. Beside them sat 3 black hard drives with silver logos, the cold storage crypto wallets. $1 billion. Sitting on a shelf. Zuri looked at it. It didn't look like $1 billion to her. It just looked like paper and plastic. She stepped down from the stool. Her legs felt wobbly, like she had just gotten off a boat. She pushed her glasses up her nose. Opened, she whispered. The room exploded. Oh my God! Sarah cried out, the sound tearing from her throat. She scrambled up from the floor, ignoring her bruised knees, and rushed to her daughter. She scooped Zuri up into a desperate, bone-crushing hug. You did it! Zuri, you did it! Edmund, the butler, let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for minutes. Remarkable, he murmured. For exactly 5 seconds, there was triumph. For 5 seconds, it felt like the story was over, like the good guys had won. Then Alistair Crow laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dry, hacking sound devoid of mirth. It was the sound of a man whose reality had just shattered and who was frantically trying to glue the pieces back together in a shape that pleased him. You think you won? Alistair asked. Sarah froze, Zuri still in her arms. She turned to look at him. The smile fell from her face. Alistair was staring at the open vault. Then he looked at Zuri. His face wasn't filled with gratitude. It was twisted into a mask of vicious, curdled malice. He realized, with a sickening jolt, what had just happened. A slow child, the daughter of his cleaning lady, had just outsmarted him. She had cracked his masterpiece in under 60 seconds. If he paid her, if he gave her the money, he would be the laughingstock of Wall Street. He would be the man who gave his fortune to a maid's kid because he was too drunk to remember his own code. His ego couldn't survive that. So his ego rewrote the script. You cheated, Alistair whispered. What? Sarah stammered. Sir, she opened it. You said. I said if she cracked it. Alistair roared, stepping forward, his eyes bulging. She didn't crack it. That's impossible. It's a Class 7 lock. No one cracks it in a minute. He pointed a shaking finger at the ceiling, then at the bookshelves. Cameras, Alistair shouted. You planted cameras. That's how she knew. You've been recording me. It's espionage. No, Sarah cried, backing away, shielding Zuri. We don't have cameras. She just remembered. Liar. Alistair lunged for his desk. He grabbed the heavy landline phone. Security. Get the police up here. Now. I have intruders. I have thieves in the penthouse. He slammed the phone down and turned back to them, his chest heaving. You think I'm stupid? Alistair spat. You think I'm going to hand over $1 billion to a con artist and her prop child? You planned this. You waited until I was vulnerable. He walked to the vault and slammed the door shut. Clang. He spun the dial, locking it again. The bet is void, Alistair declared, his voice shaking with adrenaline. Because it was rigged. And now I am going to destroy you. He advanced on them, cornering them against the bookshelf. Corporate espionage is a federal crime, Sarah. Grand larceny. Wiretapping. He listed the crimes he was inventing in real time. I will have you in prison by sunrise. And the girl goes to the state system. They love special kids in the system. The cruelty was absolute. He wasn't just refusing to pay. He was burning their lives to the ground to cover his own shame. Zuri watched him. She felt her mother shaking against her. She saw the lie forming in the air like a black smoke. He was going to win. He was rich, he was powerful, and he was a liar. And in this world, that was usually enough. But Alistair had made a mistake. He thought the vault was the only thing Zuri had seen. He forgot about the red ledger. Alistair Crow stood in front of the heavy oak doors, his arms spread wide, barring the exit. He looked like a gargoyle guarding the gates of hell. Edmund, Alistair barked at the butler. Call the precinct. Tell the commissioner I have a break-in. Tell him I want them in cuffs. Edmund hesitated, his hand hovering over his pocket. He looked at Sarah, who was sobbing into her hands. He looked at the terrified child. Sir, Edmund said softly, perhaps we should just let them. Call. Alistair screamed, his face turning purple. Or you go down with them as an accomplice. Sarah grabbed Zuri's hand. Her palms were clammy. Zuri, listen to me, she whispered frantically. When the police come, you don't say anything. You let me talk. I'll tell them I told you to do it. I'll take the blame. Zuri looked at her mother. She saw the sacrifice Sarah was about to make. Her mother was going to throw herself into the fire to save Zuri from the heat. No, Zuri thought. The word was small in her head, but it was made of iron. No more shadows. Zuri pulled her hand away from her mother. She took a step forward. She wasn't looking at the floor anymore. She was looking at Alistair Crow. I didn't use a camera, Zuri said. Her voice was clear. It wasn't the whisper of a frightened child. It was the bell-like tone of someone stating a fact. Alistair sneered. Save it for the judge. I used the spoon, Zuri continued, pointing a steady finger at the silver tea service in the corner. The soup spoon. October 14th. You were eating tomato basil. You changed the code while talking to your lawyer about Sebastian. Alistair froze. His hand dropped from the doorframe. You held the spoon in your right hand, Zuri said, reciting the memory as if reading from a script. You spun left to 9 o'clock. Right to 4 o'clock. Left to 12 o'clock. I saw it in the silver. The room went silent. The explanation was so bizarre, so specific, that it had the ring of absolute truth. That's absurd, Alistair stammered, but his eyes darted to the silver set. It's not absurd, Zuri said. It's memory. She took another step. She was standing in the center of the room now, small and terrible. And I remember the rest, too. The rest? Alistair asked, his voice dropping. The red ledger, Zuri said. The color drained from Alistair's face, so fast it looked like he had been bled. The one on the bottom shelf of the vault, Zuri said. You took it out 3 weeks ago. September 22nd. You were writing in it. You left it on your desk while you went to the bathroom. I was dusting the bookshelves. Alistair took a step toward her, his hands twitching. You didn't see anything. You're lying. Page 14, Zuri said. She closed her eyes for a second, accessing the file. She opened them. Line 3. Senator Hamilton. Re-election fund. $50,000 via shell company Alpha One. Alistair stopped. He stopped breathing. He stopped moving. He stopped existing as a billionaire and started existing as a man standing on a trapdoor. Line 4, Zuri continued, her voice gaining strength. Building Inspector Davis. Occupancy permit bribe. $10,000 cash. Line 5. Judge Kincaid. Dismissal of lawsuit. $100,000. Wire transfer to Cayman account. She looked at him. Shall I do page 15? The silence in the penthouse was heavy enough to crush a man. Edmund the butler stared at his employer. The security guards at the door exchanged a look of pure shock. They knew Alistair was ruthless, but they didn't know he was a felon. Zuri held Alistair's gaze. She wasn't holding a gun. She was holding something far more dangerous. She was holding the truth. "You called me slow," Zuri whispered. "But I'm not slow. I just watch." Alistair looked at the phone in his hand. He looked at the door. He realized, with a dawn of horror, that he couldn't call the police. If the police came, and this girl started talking, if she recited account numbers, if she gave dates, he wasn't sending her to jail. She was sending him to federal prison for 20 years. He had trapped himself. He had built a vault to keep his secrets, but he had forgotten that he lived with a living recording device. "Stop," Alistair rasped. His voice was a dry leaf. "Stop talking. Let us go," Zuri said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. "Let us go, and I won't recite page 16 to the police." Alistair looked at the girl. He looked at the maid's daughter he had mocked. He saw the end of his life in her eyes. A wild, desperate animal panic took over his brain. He couldn't let her leave. She knew too much. She was a loose end. His eyes shifted to the heavy bronze statue on his desk. "You little," Alistair snarled. He lunged. Alistair Crow moved fast for a drunk man. He grabbed the heavy bronze statue of Atlas from his desk, a 5-pound weapon capable of crushing a skull. "I'll kill you," he screamed, swinging the metal god through the air. Zuri didn't flinch. She didn't have time. She watched the arc of the bronze arm coming down. Impact in 0.4 seconds. But the impact never came. A blur of black motion intercepted the blow. One of the night security guards, a man Alistair had called disposable just hours ago, stepped in front of Zuri. He caught Alistair's wrist in midair. Crunch. The guard twisted. The statue dropped to the floor with a heavy thud. "That's enough, Mr. Crow," the guard said, his voice flat and hard. Alistair struggled, spitting and snarling. "Let go of me. You work for me. I own you. You fired us," the second guard reminded him, stepping forward to pin Alistair's other arm behind his back. "Remember? Severance checks are in the mail. So technically, we're just concerned citizens stopping an assault on a minor." Edmund, standing by the door, lowered the phone he had been holding. "The police are on their way, sir," Edmund said, his posture perfect. "I took the liberty of mentioning the assault and the federal bribery allegations. I believe the FBI might be interested in the Senator Hamilton Ledger entry." Alistair went limp. The fight drained out of him, replaced by the cold, crushing weight of reality. He looked at Zuri. She was still standing on the floor, watching him. She wasn't looking at him with hate. She was looking at him like he was a bug under a microscope. Just data. The sirens wailing 30 floors down were getting louder. 6 months later, the house in Connecticut didn't smell like floor wax or fear. It smelled of rain and pine needles. It wasn't a mansion. It was a sprawling, warm farmhouse with big windows that let in the light. Zuri sat in her bedroom. The walls were painted a soft lavender. There were no shadows here. She was organizing her bookshelf. Alphabetical by author, then by genre, then by cover color. It was still loud in her head. The hyperthymesia didn't go away, but it was manageable now. She had better things to fill her mind with. "Zuri, we're going to be late." Sarah's voice floated up the stairs. It sounded different these days. Lighter. The tremor was gone. The whistleblower reward from the SEC had been substantial. 10% of the seized $1 billion. It was enough to buy the house. It was enough to hire the best lawyers to ensure Alistair Crow stayed in prison for the rest of his natural life. But most importantly, it was enough to send Zuri to the Archer Academy for Gifted Youth. Zuri stood up. She smoothed her skirt. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing a dress with constellations on it. She walked to the corner of her room. There stood a safe. It wasn't a terrifying steel vault. It was a small, beautiful cabinet made of cherry wood with a simple combination lock. Zuri reached out. Right to 10. Left to 22. Right to 5. Click. She opened the door. There were no bearer bonds inside. No lists of bribes. No secrets that could destroy a life. Inside, resting on velvet, was a violin. It was an old instrument, bought from an antique shop, but it had a voice like honey. Zuri picked it up. She tucked it under her chin. She remembered the sound of the vault opening. Thunk. Hiss. It had been a mechanical sound. She drew the bow across the strings. Hum. This sound was better. This sound was alive. Coming, Mama. Zuri called out. She placed the violin back in the safe, but she didn't lock it. She didn't need to lock things away anymore. She wasn't hiding. She walked out of the room, leaving the door wide open. The end. Do you think Zuri did the right thing by speaking up, even though it was dangerous? Or should she have stayed hidden? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the power of the underdog.